Today, we're going to talk about the Eli Lilly letter and how covered entities are responding to it. Biggest thing that's going on right now is this in the 340B space. One of the things that we have to remember is this 340B rebate model that was supposed to be going on at this time. That has since been put on hold from a court order, and a lot of covered entities were just waiting for that to resolve or wait to hear what the final ruling was going to be on that particular case. So a lot of covered entities were kind of taken by surprise by this notification, because what this notification is telling covered entities is it's essentially an expansion of what they've been doing in their contract pharmacy market. And that is they're requiring, as of February 1st, all claims level data for all Eli Lilly products, regardless of contract pharmacy throughput or not, for any facility that has an in-house pharmacy. Covered entities are on the hook essentially to provide this claims level data to this ESP platform, which has already been established. And if you, as a covered entity, have been participating in this contract pharmacy workflow, you're already familiar with the ESP platform. But in this particular notice to covered entities, it did raise several questions. The language in the memo itself specifically cites claims level data. Well, in the pharmacy world, that typically speaks to more of a retail environment. That's where we see a lot of claims go through. But Eli Lilly is the manufacturer of drugs that are used in all walks of the hospital space, right? There's inpatient, there's outpatient, infusion, and of course, retail, just to name a few. So one of the confusing points, and some sites have reached out for clarity on this, is this just retail setting, specialty setting, contract pharmacy setting? What about infusion? What about inpatient use that might have some be exposure, maybe through the emergency room, for example? To my knowledge, there has not been a ton of clarity provided around that, just kind of a doubling down on all Eli Lilly related products, and we need all that claims data to be submitted. Okay. Doesn't really address some of the questions, because pharmacists are going to be pharmacists at the end of the day. And they just want to know, if we have to provide some kind of documentation, we just want to know very specifically what you guys need in order for us to maintain 340B pricing access to your products. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been solved in that infusion inpatient space. Like, what do we put in claims level data for those types of administrations? So still a little bit of a question mark on this, which is notable given that we're recording this on the 28th of January. It's coming right up to it. There are a notable amount of states that are actually exempt from this. And that memo does do a good job of calling them out. So to any and all covered entities out there, that's step one. Right? Do you have footing in a state that is not exempt from this workflow? The second thing to be looking at is to try to understand, what does this impact mean if I decide not to do this? So a lot of QuickStartRx customers have gotten support from us in narrowing down what their 340B purchasing footprint has been for Eli Lilly products, and then showing them what that potential impact would be if you didn't have access to the Eli Lilly 340B pricing. And surprise to nobody, it's a pretty profound number for most covered entities, especially those that have a retail environment that they're submitting through. So it's a good number to have, so that you can at least communicate that to other people in the hospital who might need to understand that, and to potential organizations, advocacy groups, because this letter is not going without challenge. There's always some type of legal debate when it comes to anything that touches the 340B program, and this is not exempt from that either. To my knowledge, I think there's been letters written, appeals made. I think the American Hospital Association has penned something to HRSA requesting some type of relief from this letter. But the point is that this is not being received well, if I had to say it, just because there's already so much chaos in the 340B world around waiting to find out what's going to happen with this rebate model. Is it going to go back on? Is it just permanently going to be swept under the rug? If it does get swept under the rug, where does that leave this Lilly model? Because it's very, very similar in how it operates. So if the rebate model gets thrown out, what happens with this one? So a lot of questions around it. The biggest question that we've got, I've already addressed, is, what is the potential impact that our organization would have if 340B pricing was stripped from the Eli Lilly catalog. So we've been pretty quick to respond to that, gotten that number turned around to those that have asked for it. Again, it's an jaw-dropping, eyebrow-raising, whatever cliche you want to use for it, because these are big numbers. Eli Lilly has a lot of products, especially in the specialty space, that if you take that 340B price away, organizations are going to feel it overnight. In my opinion, this is really more targeted to more of like that specialty space, but just wanting to stress to manufacturers like Eli Lilly that when that message comes to 340B managers in a hospital setting, the question is, well, where does this start and stop? Is this all Eli Lilly products in every single potential patient-facing environment? Or is this limited to more of your traditional point-of-sale, over-the-counter specialty retail environment? Haven't gotten a ton of clarity on that. So if I had an appeal for manufacturers, it would be sharpen the language a little bit around what you expect these covered entities to do, especially when you use big language like all, NDCs or all affected NDCs with the Lilly banner on it. You might want to get a little bit more granular in what your expectations are. Maybe work with a covered entity or two and exploring what language would a hospital need in order to do what we're hoping to get from this. This is another administrative burden that hospitals will have to take on. How would you like to do this is really going to be up to the hospital as far as at what cadence are you going to be submitting data? Are you going to submit it the day after? Are you going to collect all these on a monthly basis and just submit it on a 30-day cadence? We haven't really seen a best practice yet because nobody has actually started this process. But most of these organizations have already done the prep work in establishing ESP as a platform to receive data, just because that was going to be the primary mechanism used for the 340B rebate model, which is on hold. So a lot of these organizations are already ready, quote unquote, to submit data, but this is being very, very narrowed down to just one manufacturer for all of their claims, right? Regardless of if it's a part of the IRA or any other mechanism. So they can submit it daily, they can submit it weekly. However, to my knowledge, ESP hasn't put a governor on how much can be submitted in a 24-hour period or anything like that. So again, it's going to be an administrative burden that these hospitals are going to have to take on. And I would assume it would be something weekly just to make sure that they're getting it within that timeline. But I also don't know how quickly Eli Lilly would potentially turn off access to the 3B price either, right? Is there a grace period? Is there a, hey, we didn't receive something from you from the last 30 days, so this is a warning letter. If we don't get something from you in another 30 days, you're cut off. But it is something that if it hasn't been built already as a covered entity, I would highly advise people go through what that workflow would be and make sure that they have something that they can access with a few clicks of a mouse, a push of a button, so that they can pull that information in quickly and then just turn it around quickly. If you have to do manual scrubbing and combining spreadsheets in order to come up with this, I think you'll find that burden is untenable, and you might actually lose 3B access because of a transcription error or failure to include this data set or something like that. So a lot of these organizations do have TPAs or consultancies with a third party for their 340B program. Do those agencies help in the generation of what that report looks like, how to pull it out effectively, meaningfully, efficiently, so that all of their protections are in place too, right? Making sure that if there is going to be any PHI, patient health information submitted, that it is the bare minimum that is required for claims level data. So all of that is now on the hospitals, right? They accept all of that liability, and the carrot is the 340B price. That's going to be a net new workflow starting this year with the rebate model. Now, a lot of these covered entities have been participating in a similar model with their contract pharmacies. So if you were already established with ESP on your contract models, then you've already taken on a part of that burden with that contract pharmacy agreement. This is now opening it up to the rest of your pharmacies, so to speak. The conservative view would be submit everything for every Lilly drug that you've ever administered and replenished at a 340B rate. Others might be more prescriptive and say, no, we're just going to submit data for, our retail specialty environment, but we just don't know how much that's going to affect that workflow. So when I say net new workflow, it's that they're submitting claims level data for retail accounts and pharmacies that they haven't had to before. If you have a huge footprint and you have many entity owned pharmacies, this is going to be a lot of claims to go through. And the other thing that we're not really sure about is there an appeals process, a challenge process? What if Lilly doesn't like some of the submissions that have come through? What happens then? Do the hospitals have a chance to say, oh, no, that was our mistake. We'll fix it. Don't take the 340B price away. Again, how quickly does that 340B price get stripped if data isn't submitted or submitted accurately? There is already so much in the price files now. They're very dynamic. They change every quarter in the 340B space, and that's challenging in and of itself. Every quarter, we see just dozens and dozens of examples of bad price file loads, late price file loads, things of that nature. And there ends up being this massive cleanup process pretty much at the beginning of every quarter. This is going to be another layer on top of that, in my opinion, where, okay, I got access to the 340B price, but it's the wrong price. Or the other thing that I have questions on is what about, anything that's coming from some of those Apexis sub 340B price loads? Do I still get access to those through Lilly, or is it just the straight up ceiling price that I have access to? I think understanding that it's not just one price that gets loaded, there can be multiple prices within there, depending on what entity type it might be. Dish type facilities might have a different price load than critical access hospitals. I can only imagine that's going to get screwed up too. The first step was to understand what would the potential impact be if we don't play in the sandbox with Eli Lilly. And in many cases, once you see that number, it kind of forces hospitals to be like, well, I guess we have to play in this sandbox. Otherwise, there's probably a realistic component of them not being able to make any margin on those medications if they only are paying this whack, a wholesale acquisition cost. That being said, yes, they do operate in several classes that have many other alternatives. I believe, Eli Lilly makes a GLP-1. I'm pretty sure everybody makes a GLP-1 at this point. So that's a lever that they can control in the, pharmacy procurement office. But what you can't control is, well, maybe the payers in my state or Medicaid only pays for the Lilly brand of the GLP-1. So great, I'm going to try to fight on principle if I don't like it, but then I'm going to end up not being able to make money on the claims for the non-Eli Lilly products if I've got payers or state that doesn't like to pay me for the other brands. So it's not as easy as people are thinking it's going to be. Like if you want to pull those levers, that's fine, but there's going to be ripples that a lot of these organizations are going to need to make sure they understand before they would make a change like that. But just make sure that your hospital is not going to go in the red overnight, because at the end of the day, it's a patient that's going to be affected by it. So I'm not in love with any of this model, if I had to be honest. I don't mind the call for transparency, though, and I think a lot of pharmacists would say the same thing, that it's not that hospitals are trying to hide from how 340B is spent, but I do think that there needs to be a lot more education around what those 340B savings dollars are. I think that's one of the big struggles in the lay press of understanding the 340B program, is that a lot of this gets labeled up to hospital X saved $300 million because of 340B. So a lot of people just assume there's an account somewhere with $300 million sitting in it, and they want to know, what are you going to use that money on? Well, that's not how it works. 340B program is more of like having a coupon. So, okay, I gave you the coupon. I didn't have to spend as much, and that meant I was able to spend that money elsewhere. And it's really hard to put a label on every cent that comes through from a savings perspective. Is it doable? I think so, but I think it needs to be framed in a better way than it is right now. If this does proceed further along, and then there is an expectation that hospitals have to submit the data through some type of a portal, again, from a hospital administrator standpoint, I would prefer to be working with a company that I already had agreements with at a contractual level about what PHI I can share, because I know how you handle it. It's been audited. It's been validated. All the attorneys have signed off on it. All the compliance officers have signed on it. The risk has been mitigated to almost zero. That's how I think about these types of things. Jumping to this type of a model with an unknown, I could see how that could stress people out. I'm speaking for Eli Lilly here, so this is just a theory. But I think from looking at it from their lens, they're sitting there saying all these sites were preparing for this 340B model submission anyway, so they shouldn't have needed a lot of runway to get ready for this. But hospitals don't really think that way. We try to come up with very precise protocols and procedures that are set up to only work within these guardrails. Well, they've instituted a different protocol that requires a slightly different procedure, which means the reports that they were originally intending to pull for a lot of these drugs that were a part of the IRA, well, now that has to be shifted, which means a new report has to be created or run, whether that's from IT or whether that's from a third party. You do need that infrastructure set up because, again, you have to make sure that you're doing this correctly. So I understand that there's a need for time. And that's why one of the things that I had talked about earlier was I would like to understand a grace period or what that looks like from Eli Lilly. But the other thing that we don't really know at this point is just going to be my specific account or every single 340B account that I have for every pharmacy and every hospital. Do those suddenly just get turned off? Is it just for the one that had a history of purchasing on 340B? What about the others that have never purchased an Eli Lilly product on 340B? Did they still have access? So there's still a lot of infrastructure questions about how this is going to be implemented. And again, I think that they were really hedging that a lot of these folks had already set up these types of reports, and then it would be easy to just replace X with Y, adjust the timeline, adjust the NDCs, and then boom, it sends it off. Hospitals don't work that way. We deal with a lot of sensitive information, and we want to make sure that if we do carve this up, it's going to be precisely what we need, and we need to be able to stand on the book if it ever gets called into question.